The year was 1879, and winter had settled over the valley like a heavy, unrelenting curse. Snow came early that year, thick, bitter flakes that covered the land from the high pines to the riverbeds below Silver Creek. In that lonely corner of the Arizona Territory, life belonged only to the hard and the stubborn, and Mary Collins was both. Her cabin stood near the foot of Apache Ridge, a two-room structure of pine logs and mud chinking, built by her husband before fever took him. The roof leaked in 3 places, and the wind crawled through the cracks like a thief in the night. Yet somehow Mary had made it a home for herself and her 2 children, 12-year-old Tom and little Rose, who was barely 8. Each morning she rose before dawn to stoke the fire, pull water from the half-frozen well, and feed the animals. 3 goats, a mule too old for plowing, and a hen that hadn't laid an egg in a week. She wore her husband's coat now, its sleeves rolled high, and a red kerchief around her neck to block the cold. The days blurred together, chopping wood, boiling thin stew, mending clothes by the flicker of a lantern. Life had stripped her of vanity and comfort, but not dignity. There was a quiet pride in the way she faced the world, chin high, back straight, even when her stomach ached with hunger. Silver Creek town lay 8 miles south beyond the frozen river. She rode there once a week to trade butter or goat cheese for coffee and flour. The townsfolk pitied her, but few lent a hand. Out here, pity was cheap. Help was not. Men at the saloon would lower their voices when she passed. Speaking of the Collins widow in that half-mocking, half-longing tone men reserve for women who refuse them, she ignored them all. She had buried one man she'd loved, and she had no room in her heart for another. That night the wind screamed across the ridge. Snow rattled against the windows, and the world outside turned white as bone. Mary was sewing by lamplight while the children slept when she heard the mule bray. Loud and frightened, her head snapped up. Wolves, maybe. Or worse, drifters. She grabbed the rifle from above the hearth and stepped out into the cold. The moon glowed faint through the clouds, casting silver light over the drifts. That's when she saw it. A dark shape sprawled near the fence line, half buried in snow. Cautiously, she moved closer, boots crunching in the frost. It was a man, face down, blood crusted along his side. His horse lay dead a few yards away, arrows jutting from its flank. Tom had followed her outside, barefoot and wide-eyed. Is he dead? Mary knelt, turning the man over. His skin was copper dark, his features strong and sharp. Apache. Her breath caught. For a moment, instinct told her to leave him, to walk away before the town or the soldiers caught wind that she'd harbored one of them. But the man's breath came in ragged gasps. His eyes fluttered open, black as coal, unfocused. "Please," he rasped. That single word was enough. "Get the blanket," she told Tom. "Now." They hauled him inside, laid him near the fire. The children stared as Mary cut away his blood-soaked shirt. The wound was bad, a deep gash under the ribs, likely from an arrow. She cleaned it with whiskey, pressed a rag to stop the bleeding, and stitched the flesh as best she could. When she was done, she sat back, shaking from exhaustion. "He may not make it through the night," she whispered. Tom frowned. "Ma, he's an Indian. What if he's just a man who needs help?" She cut him off. "You remember what your pa used to say? A person's measure ain't in their skin, but in what they do." The boy nodded reluctantly. Rose, half asleep on the floor, whispered, "He looks cold." Mary smiled faintly. "Then we'll keep him warm." The night stretched long. The storm howled outside, but inside the cabin the fire glowed soft and steady. Mary sat awake, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall, each breath a small battle. Occasionally he murmured words in a language she didn't understand. Gentle, rhythmic sounds like prayers to the wind. As dawn came pale through the cracks, she studied his face. He was young, perhaps 30, maybe younger, with long black hair braided in the Apache way, and a silver amulet hanging around his neck, engraved with strange markings. His body bore scars, not from battle alone, but from a hard life. Mary thought of her husband then, how he'd looked the day he died, sweat on his brow, her hand clutching his. The same helplessness filled her chest now, only this time she refused to let death win. For 2 days the man lingered between life and death. She changed his bandages, spooned broth into his mouth, and wiped the fever sweat from his brow. When his breathing turned easier, she allowed herself to hope. On the 3rd night he stirred and spoke in English. slow, rough words. "Where am I?" "You're safe," she said softly. "Silver Creek Valley. My name's Mary Collins." He blinked, studying her face. "You saved me." "You were dying," she replied simply. A faint smile touched his lips. "I owe you." Then his eyes closed again. Days became weeks. The snow began to thin under the weak sun, and the man grew stronger. Mary learned his name, Nakai. He was Apache by blood, but spoke English with careful grace. He told her he'd been ambushed by outlaws, white men and Mexicans, who wanted his horses and gold. His tribe had peace with the settlers now, but not all men honored peace. When he could walk again, he insisted on helping, chopping wood, fixing the fence, even repairing the roof where it sagged under snow. Tom followed him everywhere, eager to learn how to track prints or snare rabbits. Rose adored him too, bringing him flowers she found near the creek. Mary tried to keep her distance. The man's presence unsettled her, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. There was calm in him, a quiet strength that made her heart ache. At night, when the children slept, Nakai would tell her stories of his people, of spirits that guarded the mountains, of rivers that ran red at sunset. His voice was low and deep, like a song carried on the wind. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with hunger, but with gratitude, as though trying to understand the woman who had saved him. "Why did you help me?" he asked one evening, staring into the fire. Mary's eyes softened. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing. It's what keeps the world from turning cruel." He nodded slowly. "In my tongue there is a word, nahitsili. It means one who gives light in darkness." He looked at her then, and something in his gaze made her heart tremble. By spring, the valley began to thaw. The snow receded, revealing earth ready for seed. Life, stubborn as Mary herself, returned to the land. Nakai's wound had healed, though the scar remained. The day he first walked without limping, Tom shouted in joy. Mary smiled too, but a shadow crossed her heart. She knew what strength meant. It meant he'd soon leave. That night, she sat by the fire, sewing his torn shirt, her hands trembling just slightly. "Your people will be looking for you," she said quietly. He nodded. "Yes, I must return." The silence between them was heavy, filled with things neither dared say. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Mary Collins, among my people, when a life is saved, a bond is formed that cannot be broken. You have that bond with me." Her throat tightened. "I didn't do it for a bond, Nakai." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." That night after the fire burned low, Mary stepped outside. The stars spread wide across the black sky, cold, endless, beautiful. She looked toward the ridge where she'd found him, remembering the blood in the snow and how fragile life had seemed. Now the snow was gone, replaced by thawing earth, and the man who had nearly died slept beneath her roof. She didn't understand why, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying a promise she couldn't yet name. Somewhere deep inside, Mary Collins knew her life was about to change, though whether for salvation or heartbreak she could not tell. When the last snow melted off the ridge and the first blades of green pushed through the soil, the man called Nakai began to stir like the earth itself awakening from its long sleep. It had been 3 weeks since Mary Collins and her children dragged him in from the snow, half dead and frozen. The fever had broken, the wound had closed, and color had begun to creep back into his skin, yet there was still a look in his eyes, that watchful stillness of a man who'd lived too long in danger to trust the quiet. On the morning the thaw began, the sound of a woodpecker tapping echoed through the valley. Nakai sat up in bed, his breath slow, eyes following the streak of sunlight that slipped through the cabin's wooden slats. He had been dreaming, of sand dunes, of his father's voice calling him home, of horses running free across the desert. But now, as he blinked into the real light, he saw the widow instead, bent over the hearth stirring a pot, her brown hair tied back, sleeves rolled high as she worked. He watched her silently for a long time. There was strength in her every motion, not loud or boastful, but the quiet, relentless kind that holds families and whole frontiers together. When she noticed his gaze, she gave a start, then smiled faintly. "Well, you're awake. Looks like you decided to live after all." His lips twitched in a tired smile. "Seems so." though I can't say it was my doing." His voice was deep, smooth with an accent that carried the rhythm of the desert wind. "You should thank your luck, or my stubbornness," she replied, ladling some broth into a bowl. "You were half gone when we found you. Fever near took you twice, when I remember." He frowned as though the memory burned. "The snow. The arrows. Then, light." He looked at her again. "You," Mary tried to laugh it off. "Don't go calling me an angel. I'm just a woman with a sharp needle and too much sense to let a man freeze on my land." But inside, something fluttered in her chest she hadn't felt in years, a warmth that wasn't from the fire. Over the next few days, Nakai regained his strength. He ate little, slept often, and walked slow, leaning on a stick. Tom, curious and restless, followed him around the yard, asking questions faster than a woodpecker could tap. "Is it true you can track a man by scent?" Nakai chuckled softly. "Not scent, but prints, wind, and silence. The land speaks if you listen. Can you teach me?" the boy asked eagerly. "Perhaps," Nakai said, his dark eyes glinting. "But first you must learn patience." Mary watched them from the porch, the corner of her mouth lifting. She had seen Tom smile more in the last 2 days than in the whole of the past year. Rose, too, had taken to bringing Nakai wildflowers, setting them in little jars by his bedside. He would thank her every time in Apache, saying the word softly, a he-he, gratitude spoken like a prayer. At night, when the children slept, Nakai and Mary would talk by the fire. His English was careful, shaped by thought, but his meaning ran deep. He spoke of his home far to the south, a land of red rock canyons and wild horses, where his people raised cattle and traded freely with white settlers. "My father owned more land than a man could ride in a day," he said one evening, staring into the flames. "We called it the Red Mesa Ranch. I was his only son." Mary listened, stirring the fire with the poker. "So what brought you so far north?" "Greed," he said simply. "There were men who didn't want peace. They saw our gold, our cattle, our water. They attacked my riders while we were driving a herd to Tucson. I was shot, left for dead. I followed the river north until you found us," she finished softly. He nodded. "Or you found me." A silence followed. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines, lonely and low. "You plan to go back?" she asked finally. "When I am strong enough," Nakai said. "My people think me dead, but I have much to reclaim." Mary's hand froze over the fire. She tried to sound casual. "Then you'll be leaving soon." "Yes," he said. But then his gaze softened. "I will not forget who saved me." Something in the way he said it, simple, solemn, sent a shiver through her. She busied herself with dishes, pretending not to feel the weight of his words. Days bled into one another like the melting snow feeding the creek. Nakai grew stronger, chopping wood, fixing the cabin's door, even mending the roof that had leaked all winter. Mary tried to insist he rest, but he only smiled that quiet, patient smile. "You gave me back my life," he said one morning. "Let me give something back." So she let him. They worked together under the pale spring sun, she splitting kindling while he carried logs, their rhythm slow and natural, like two halves of the same task. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have a man around who didn't speak down to her, didn't pity her, didn't see her as a burden or conquest. Sometimes, when she caught him watching her, there was no judgment in his eyes, only respect. And something else, something deep and unspoken. Word reached Silver Creek soon enough. It always did. The blacksmith's wife spotted Mary in town buying medicine and whispered to the storekeeper that she'd seen a painted savage at the Collins cabin. By the week's end, the whole town knew the story, twisted and sour by gossip's tongue. When the sheriff came riding up one afternoon, Mary knew it before he even dismounted. "Afternoon, Miss Collins," he said, tipping his hat. "Mind if I step inside?" "Depends what for," she said coolly, arms crossed. He cleared his throat. "Word's going round you're harboring an Apache out here. Now, I ain't saying I believe everything folks yap about, but I gotta make sure things are lawful." Nakai appeared in the doorway behind her, tall and calm, the rifle slung loosely in his hand. The sheriff's hand drifted near his holster, more from reflex than need. Mary stepped between them. "He's no threat, Sheriff. He was hurt, I helped him. That's all." "Helping's one thing," the sheriff said slowly, eyes darting to Nakai. "But harboring's another. Folks don't take kindly to. Folks can mind their own damn business," Mary snapped, surprising even herself. The sheriff blinked, then sighed. "You always were headstrong, Mary, just Be careful. The McGregor gang's been seen near the ridge again. They don't like Indians much, and they like money even more. If they think you've got one worth ransom, it could turn ugly. With that, he tipped his hat again and rode off, his warning hanging heavy in the cold air. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. She stared into the dying fire, thinking of the sheriff's words. The McGregors were killers, outlaws who terrorized the valley for years. If they knew Nakai was alive and rich, they'd come for him again. She looked over at the man sleeping on the floor by the hearth, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Something about his presence, peaceful yet powerful, filled her with both comfort and fear. When the wind outside shifted, she moved closer to the window. A flicker caught her eye. Distant torchlight in the canyon. Riders. Her pulse quickened. She turned to wake Nakai, but he was already on his feet, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. "They've found me," he said quietly. Mary's breath caught. "Then we have to run," he shook his head. "No, you saved me. Now I protect you." And in that instant, Mary understood. The bond he had spoken of, the one between lives saved, was more than words. It was sacred. The night grew tense, filled with the scent of smoke and the whisper of danger. Nakai and Tom moved silently around the cabin, boarding windows, checking bullets, readying for whatever was to come. Mary tried to still her shaking hands, but when Nakai paused beside her, his voice low and steady, it calmed her like a prayer. "Do not fear. Nahitsili," he said softly, the Apache word rolling like music. "You gave light once. Now I give it back." Outside, the first gunshot cracked through the night, and as the firelight flashed across his face, half warrior, half man, Mary knew their lives were no longer separate stories, but one. The storm that had saved Nakai's life had passed, but another kind of storm was gathering. One of whispers, greed, and vengeance. Silver Creek had always been a town of talkers. By spring, the meadows were alive with wildflowers, but the hearts of its people were still cold as winter. Mary Collins could feel it every time she rode into town. The way folks stopped mid-conversation when she entered the general store, the sideways glances, the low murmurs that followed her out the door. "Widow Collins keeps company with a red man," someone would mutter. "Apache gold, they say. Hiding it up by her cabin. Won't end well. Never does." She ignored it, as she always had, but the weight of their judgment pressed harder each trip. Even Tom had noticed. "Ma," he said one morning as they unloaded sacks of flour, "why do they look at us that way?" "Because folks fear what they don't understand," she answered simply, though the truth tasted bitter on her tongue. Nakai, meanwhile, paid no mind to gossip. He worked each day with quiet purpose, his strength now fully returned. He mended fences, plowed her small patch of land, even broke a wild mustang that had been haunting the ridge since before winter. Watching him move, smooth, powerful, utterly at peace with the land, stirred something deep inside Mary that she hadn't felt since before her husband's death. He was different from any man she'd known. There was no boasting, no swagger, no need to fill silence with noise. When he spoke, his words carried weight. When he looked at her, it was as if he saw beyond the surface, into her loneliness, her resilience, her buried hope. One afternoon, while hanging laundry, she found him standing near the fence line, gazing toward the horizon. "What is it?" she asked. He pointed toward the distant dust cloud rolling between the hills. "Riders," he said softly. 5, maybe 6, she shaded her eyes. "Could be ranchers. Could be worse," he murmured, and he was right. That night, as the sun sank behind the mountains, a group of men rode into Silver Creek. The McGregor gang, a name whispered with the kind of fear men tried not to show. They were killers, rustlers, and thieves who called no man master. Their leader, Clyde McGregor, was a brute with a scar across his face and a grin that could sour milk. They came looking for gold. They came looking for Nakai. It began with a warning. The sheriff rode hard to Mary's cabin at dusk, dust caked on his hat and sweat darkening his shirt. "Mary," he said, his voice tense, "you got trouble coming. The McGregors are camped 2 miles down the ridge. I can't stop 'em all. You best get your young'uns out of here." Mary's blood turned to ice. "What do they want?" He glanced toward Nakai, who stood behind her on the porch, calm and unflinching. "They heard the Apache ain't dead. Heard he's sitting on a pile of golden cattle south of here. You saved him, and that's made you part of it now. Let them come, Nakai said quietly. The sheriff shook his head. You don't understand, son. Those men don't fight fair. They burn what they can't steal. And they'll start with this cabin. Mary felt a tremor in her chest. We can't run. Not with the children. Nakai's gaze hardened, the faintest hint of fire flickering in his dark eyes. Then we fight. That night they prepared. Tom helped load the rifles. Rose gathered blankets and water. Nakai stacked barrels by the windows for cover. The small cabin became a fortress, its walls humming with tension. Mary worked beside him, her hands steady though her heart thundered. You shouldn't stay, she said. They're after you, not us. He looked at her, expression unreadable. When I lay dying in the snow, you could have walked away. You did not. Now I will not. Their eyes held for a moment too long, and in that silence something unspoken passed between them. Not words, but understanding. Outside, the night fell deep and black. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of an owl. Then came the faint echo of hooves. Mary's breath caught. Nakai moved to the window, peering through a slit between boards. In the distance, torches flickered, like fireflies of death winding down the ridge. They're here, he whispered. The first shots came at midnight. The McGregors rode up fast and loud, whooping like devils. Gunfire lighting the darkness. Bullets splintered wood, glass shattered, and Rose screamed. Down! Nakai roared, pulling her behind the stove. Tom fired through a crack in the shutters, his face pale but determined. Mary reloaded for him, her hands moving automatically, every instinct screaming to protect her children. Nakai's rifle cracked again and again, each shot precise and measured. 2 riders went down before they reached the fence. The rest scattered, shouting curses into the wind. Hold steady, Nakai murmured. They'll try to circle behind. He was right. The next attack came from the rear, 2 men creeping toward the barn, torches in hand. Mary saw them first. Without thinking, she grabbed her husband's old shotgun and stepped out into the cold night. The blast tore through the quiet, dropping 1 man instantly. The other turned, but Nakai was already there, moving like a shadow. The second man fell with a knife buried in his chest. When the smoke cleared, the yard was silent again, save for the crackle of burning torches dying in the snow. Mary stood trembling, the gun heavy in her hands. Nakai approached slowly, his eyes soft. You fight like a warrior, he said. She laughed shakily. I fight like a mother. He smiled, a rare, quiet smile that made her heart ache. There is no stronger kind. By dawn, the McGregors retreated. 3 of their men lay dead in the yard. 2 more fled into the hills. The sheriff would find their bodies come morning and spin his tales of bravery. But the truth would remain here, between a widow, her children, and the Apache who'd stood between them and death. Mary collapsed on the steps, exhausted. Nakai knelt beside her, wiping soot from her cheek. They'll come again, she said softly. Yes, he admitted. But not tonight. Why? He looked east where the first light of dawn touched the peaks. Because they lost their fear of me once. Now they remember it. For a long while they sat in silence, watching the light spread over the valley. The air smelled of gunpowder and pine sap. Tom and Rose slept inside, huddled together. Finally, Mary spoke. I should be angry at you. You brought this to my door. He nodded. You should, but I'm not, she whispered. Because for the first time since my husband died, I wasn't afraid. Nakai's hand brushed hers, tentative but sure. Fear fades when hearts are strong together. She met his gaze, those dark, endless eyes that held both wildness and peace. For the first time, she didn't see an outsider, a stranger or an Apache. She saw the man who had stood in front of her children when death came knocking, the man who'd chosen her family as his own. Later that morning, as Nakai buried the dead near the tree line, Mary stood at the doorway watching. His movements were steady, deliberate, respectful. When he finished, he placed stones over the graves, not as a gesture of mercy but of closure. These men followed greed, he said. The land will take them back and make them part of its silence. Mary stepped beside him. And what about us? She asked quietly. He turned to her, eyes searching hers. You saved me once, Mary Collins. But it seems I am still saving myself. Here, with you. She didn't answer, just looked toward the ridge where smoke still lingered. Somewhere out there more danger waited. She knew it as surely as she knew her own heartbeat. But for now the sun was rising and her world, small and battered though it was, and he still stood. And when Nakai took her hand, rough palm against calloused skin, she didn't pull away. For the first time since her husband's death, she allowed herself to feel what she had long buried. Not fear, not duty, but the first quiet stirrings of love. Spring ripened into summer, and the land around Silver Creek began to bloom again. Wildflowers spread across the meadows, and the sound of the river carried a softer song. The snowmelt fed the soil, and for the first time in years, Mary's small garden sprouted healthy green shoots. It seemed as if the land itself, weary of death and hardship, was breathing again. The attack on the cabin had left its scars: a bullet hole in the wall, a broken window, the faint black marks of smoke along the eaves. But the family survived. Every morning, Mary awoke to birds instead of gunfire, sunlight instead of snow. And every morning she found Nakai already awake, tending the fence, sharpening tools, or teaching Tom how to read the tracks of coyotes in the dirt. In truth, life had settled into a strange, fragile peace. Still, beneath that calm, questions stirred. Questions Mary was too afraid to ask, and Nakai too proud to answer. One evening, as the heat faded from the day, Nakai stood on the ridge above the cabin, watching the horizon. The light painted his skin bronze and gold, and his shadow stretched long across the grass. Mary joined him, a shawl around her shoulders. She followed his gaze, southward toward the mountains glowing red in the distance. "That's where your people are," she said softly. He nodded. "Red Mesa, my home." "You speak of it like it's more than a place," she said. "It is," he replied. "It's the heart of who I am." A silence hung between them. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and pine sap. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her for weeks. "You've never said what you'll do when you go back." Nakai turned to her slowly. "Because I wasn't sure if I could." His voice was quiet, but the weight in it was heavy. "But now I am ready. My people think I am dead, my land stolen, my herd scattered. I must return and set things right." She stared at him, her throat tightening. "You'll leave soon, then?" "Yes." Mary tried to smile, but it faltered. "You've done more than your share here, Nakai. We'll be all right." "You are strong," he said, eyes softening. "But I did not stay only out of debt." She met his gaze, heart pounding. "Then why?" Nakai stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the faint scent of smoke and leather. "Because this cabin, your children, and Yume's reminded me what worth life has." "I had forgotten." Mary's eyes glistened. "You say that like you won't be coming back." He looked toward the horizon again. "A promise is not broken by distance," he said. "If I say I will return, then I will." 2 days later he was gone. He left before dawn, his horse saddled, his rifle across his back. Tom woke just in time to see him ride off and shouted from the porch. Nakai turned once, raising a hand in farewell, then disappeared into the silver mist rising off the valley. For the first time since the snowstorm, the cabin felt empty again. Mary went about her chores in silence, her chest hollow. Nights were the worst. The quiet stretching too long, the bed too cold, the sound of the wind outside reminding her of the loneliness she had thought she'd buried for good. Weeks passed. Summer deepened. The children grew restless, and the townsfolk began to talk again. Some said the Apache had run off with stolen gold. Others claimed the McGregors had finished the job they started. Mary refused to listen, but doubt, like a slow poison, crept into her heart. She prayed, and not to God, but to fate, that he would return. Then one afternoon, just as July's sun burned the horizon, a sound of thunder rolled through the valley. Tom was the first to hear it. Not thunder, but hooves. He ran to the porch, eyes wide. "Ma! Riders!" Mary's stomach twisted. She stepped outside, shielding her eyes from the glare. On the distant ridge, a column of horsemen approached. Not outlaws this time, but riders in formation, their mounts sleek and strong. Wagons followed, heavy with crates and supplies. Sunlight glinted off polished metal and silver ornaments. At their head rode Nakai, but he was not the same man who had left. He wore a long, dark coat trimmed with beadwork, his hair tied back with silver rings, and across his chest hung a ceremonial band of woven turquoise. Around him rode armed men, Apaches and Mexicans alike, loyal riders who treated him with quiet respect. Behind them, 3 wagons bore cattle, barrels of grain, and chests bound with iron. Mary froze on the porch, disbelief and confusion washing over her. Nakai dismounted, his boots crunching against the dry earth. For a moment, they only stared at each other. Then he smiled. That same small, calm smile that had once warmed her frozen heart. "I told you I would return," he said. Mary's voice trembled. "What is all this?" "My inheritance," he answered simply. "And yours if you'll have it." She frowned, unable to comprehend. "I don't understand." He gestured toward the riders.
"When I left, I went to reclaim what was stolen."
"My father's land, our ranch, spans from the Red Mesa to the river. The McGregors took it when they thought me dead. But I gathered my men, proved who I was, and drove them off. The land is free again." Mary's hand went to her mouth. "You mean you own all that?" He nodded. "I am Nakai Nez, son of Chief Dolar, heir to the Red Mesa lands and the herds upon it. My people are ranchers, traders, and guardians of that valley. My father's blood built it, and his promise was that it would feed any soul who came to us in peace." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That is why I came back, Mary Collins. Because when I was dying, you gave me what gold cannot buy and mercy. You saw not what I was, but who I was. And I swore that if I lived, I would return your kindness 100-fold. She shook her head slowly, tears stinging her eyes. "I didn't save you for reward." "I know," he said. "That is why you deserve it." Behind him, his riders began unloading the wagons. Sacks of grain, bolts of cloth, barrels of coffee and sugar, even a new plow. The children ran forward laughing as the horses snorted and stamped. Tom's eyes gleamed when Nakai handed him a polished rifle, engraved with silver feathers. "For you," Nakai said. "A man should have a weapon he can trust." Rose squealed when she saw a small pony among the herd, her name already carved into the saddle. Mary stood frozen, her mind whirling. "You shouldn't have done this," she said softly. "We can't accept—" Nakai took her hand gently, his calloused fingers curling around hers. "You gave me life. What greater gift could there be? This is not payment. It is a home." That night they sat by the fire again, the same place where, months before, he had nearly died. The cabin seemed smaller now, yet warmer somehow, filled with the laughter of children and the scent of fresh bread baking on the hearth. Nakai spoke quietly, telling them how he had ridden through the desert, rallied his kin, and reclaimed the Red Mesa Ranch. "It took 20 men and more courage than I thought I had left," he said. "But when I thought I'd fall, I remembered your voice. That night in the snow when you said I would live." Mary's eyes glistened. "I never meant for you to come back like this." He smiled faintly. "I came back because you are part of my story now, and I would not let my story end without you in it." Outside, the night was clear and full of stars. Nakai rose and opened the door. "Come," he said. Mary followed him outside. The valley stretched before them, dark pines, silver moonlight on the creek, the whisper of wind in the grass. Nakai pointed south. "Tomorrow we ride for Red Mesa. I want you and your children to see what your kindness saved." Her breath caught. "You mean to take us there?" "I mean to take you home." For a long time neither spoke. Then slowly she nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. After so many years of scraping by, of living day to day with nothing but willpower and worn hands, someone was offering her more than survival. He was offering her life, not bought, not begged for, but earned in kindness. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars watched over them, Nakai whispered to her softly, his voice low and reverent. "In my people's tongue we say Ashi Shidu Nihiashi. My life and your life are tied together. You saved me. Now I live to honor that." Mary turned toward him, her heart trembling. "Then maybe," she whispered, "we were both saved." And as the night deepened, the wind through the pines carried not sorrow but promise, the promise of two souls, once broken by loss and distance, now bound by mercy, courage, and love. The morning sun rose over the ridge like a fire reborn, painting the valley in gold and crimson. Mary Collins stood on the porch of her cabin, no longer poor, no longer hunted, and watched as the wagons were loaded for the journey to Red Mesa. The children were up before dawn, their laughter echoing through the yard. Rose brushed her pony's mane with ribbons, while Tom helped tie down the barrels of grain. But Mary's eyes were fixed on Nakai. He stood near his horse, tightening the saddle strap, every movement deliberate, steady, a man who belonged to the land and commanded it. The faint scars on his shoulder were reminders of the storm that had first brought him to her door. Now healed and proud, he looked like a figure carved from the very stone of the desert. When he turned, his eyes found hers immediately. "Ready?" he asked. Mary nodded, though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. "As I'll ever be." They left Silver Creek at sunrise, following the old cattle trail south. The land opened before them, rolling plains of sage and sun, where the wind carried the cry of hawks and the distant thrum of hooves. For Mary, who had spent most of her life within a mile of her cabin, every mile felt like stepping into another world. At noon, they stopped by a riverbank shaded by cottonwoods. The riders watered the horses while Nakai knelt beside the stream to fill a canteen. Mary came beside him, dipping her hands into the cold water. "It feels strange," she said, watching the ripples. "To be leaving everything behind." Nakai smiled faintly. "You are not leaving. You are walking toward what was waiting." She looked up at him. "You speak like a prophet sometimes." He chuckled softly. "No. Just a man who has been lost enough times to know what home feels like when he finds it." She lowered her gaze, her heart beating faster. For so long she had lived without hope, just surviving day by day for the sake of her children. Yet now she was part of something greater, a journey, a destiny, a love that had grown from ashes and mercy. By dusk, the sun dipped low behind the red hills. The world turned the color of burning embers. Nakai pointed toward the horizon, where a broad plateau rose from the desert like a fortress. "There," he said. "That is Red Mesa." Mary's breath caught. Even from miles away, it was magnificent. Cliffs the color of blood and fire, crowned by juniper trees and silver rock. Below it stretched a vast valley, a green oasis fed by streams and dotted with horses and cattle. Smoke curled from distant chimneys and glimmers of light marked where campfires burned. Her children gasped, eyes wide. "It's beautiful," Rose whispered. "It's home," Nakai said simply. When they arrived, the people of Red Mesa gathered to meet them. Men, women, and children came out of the lodges and ranch houses dressed in woven blankets and leather vests, their hair shining in the sunset. They embraced Nakai with joy and reverence, speaking in Apache, voices rich with emotion. Mary could not understand the words, but she could feel their warmth. A tall, white-haired woman stepped forward, her face strong and kind. She placed her hands on Nakai's shoulders and said something in their tongue. Nakai bowed his head and answered softly. Then he turned to Mary. "This is my mother," he said. "She thought me dead." The woman looked at Mary for a long moment, then smiled. "He says you brought my son back from the grave," she said in accented English. "For that, my heart is yours." Mary felt tears rise to her eyes as the woman embraced her. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten: belonging. That night, Red Mesa came alive with music and firelight. The air was filled with the scent of roasted venison and cornbread. The drums echoed like the heartbeat of the land, and the stars overhead burned brighter than she had ever seen. Tom danced with the young braves, learning their steps, while Rose sat beside Nakai's mother, wide-eyed as she listened to old stories. Mary stood a little apart, watching it all. The firelight reflected in her eyes, and for once she wasn't thinking of chores or debts or danger. She was thinking of how far she had come, from the lonely widow on the frontier to this moment surrounded by life and warmth. Then Nakai approached, carrying 2 cups of sweet cactus wine. He offered one to her. "You're quiet," he said. "Do you regret coming?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I just can't believe it's real." He looked out across the fire where his people sang beneath the stars. "Neither could I once. I thought the world was only cruelty and loss. But you showed me there is still mercy. Still grace," Mary smiled softly. "And you showed me there's still love." Later, when the fires burned low and the people drifted to sleep, Nakai led her up a narrow trail to the ridge overlooking the valley. The night was silent except for the distant hum of insects and the whisper of the wind. Below them, the lights of Red Mesa flickered like fallen stars. Nakai stopped and turned to her. "This is where my father used to stand," he said quietly. "He said a man should see the whole of his world before he makes a promise." Mary tilted her head. "What kind of promise?" "The kind that binds one soul to another." He reached into his coat and drew out a small pouch made of doeskin. From it he pulled a simple ring of silver and turquoise, carved with a symbol of the mountain hawk, the bird that never loses its way. Mary gasped softly. Nakai. He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. In my people's way, when a man offers this, it is not for a season or a year. It is for all the winters and summers to come. You saved my life. I wish to share what's left of it with you. Her breath trembled, the world spinning around her, the valley below, the stars above, the man before her. You mean marriage? In your tongue, yes, he said. But in mine it means more. It means your children become mine, your sorrows mine, and your heart at my home. Tears filled her eyes. I've been alone a long time, she whispered. I don't know if I remember how to be anything else. He smiled gently. Then let us learn together, and there, beneath the boundless sky of the Wild West, Mary Collins, the poor widow who once struggled to feed her children, placed her hand in that of the Apache who had come to her door half dead. Their worlds, so different, met in that quiet moment and became one. Weeks passed and the seasons turned again. Mary learned the rhythms of Red Mesa, the rustle of cattle, the songs of dawn, the laughter of the people. She worked alongside Nakai, helping rebuild the ranch house and plant new crops. Her hands, once cracked from toil, now built instead of merely surviving. Her eyes, once haunted by fear, shone with purpose. Tom grew into a fine young man, brave and sure, following Nakai on rides across the plains. Rose learned to braid her hair with turquoise beads and laughed more than she ever had before. And Mary, she found peace. Sometimes, she would stand on that ridge, the same one where Nakai had placed the ring upon her finger. The wind would brush her cheek, carrying the scent of cedar and rain, and she would whisper a prayer, not to the God of her old church, nor to any spirit of the land, but to the simple miracle of life and love itself. One evening, as the sun sank low and the cattle came home across the red dust, Nakai rode up beside her. He dismounted, wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and said, Do you see that ridge? She nodded. The one with the lone pine? That's where we'll build our house, he said. A place for our family, yours and mine, to look over this land forever. Mary leaned against him, the golden light wrapping them both. We already have everything I ever dreamed of. He smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. Then we'll build it anyway, for the children, for the future. The wind rose, rustling the tall grass, and the sky turned crimson over the Red Mesa Valley. And in that moment, the poor widow and the once dying Apache stood together as equals, as partners, as souls reborn from sorrow. For the rest of their days, when the people of Silver Creek spoke of Mary Collins, they said, she was the woman who saved a dying man and found her salvation in his love.